I thought moving into a quiet, gated community would finally give my wife and me the peace we'd been craving. After years of deployments, long stretches in combat zones, and nights that felt like they would never end, I wanted nothing more than a home where she could feel safe, where I could finally exhale without a constant sense of danger. But as I learned that morning, peace isn't about fences, manicured lawns, or white picket signs. Sometimes, peace depends on the people who claim to enforce it. Her name is Emily. She's always been the kind of woman who notices the small things, how sunlight hits the corner of a room, the way flowers bloom in sequence if you just give them a little care. She's gentle, patient, almost impossibly kind. And she's stubborn, too. The kind of stubborn that makes her stand up for herself even when it's easier to stay quiet. That stubbornness is part of what I love about her, but that morning, it might have been exactly what put her in danger. The day started like any other. I was in the garage tinkering with my old motorcycle, running a mental checklist for maintenance. Emily was outside, her hands in the soil, planting tulips along the edge of our front lawn. The sun was bright but soft, casting a golden glow over the street. Our neighbors waved as they passed, children ran along the sidewalks, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. I didn't see them at first. 3 people, wearing the crisp, official-looking badges of our homeowners association, were marching up the driveway like they owned the place. Their expressions were tight, their eyes cold. I knew, even before I heard their words, that this wasn't going to be a friendly visit. Emily didn't notice them either at first. She was crouched down, carefully adjusting a row of tulips, humming quietly to herself. I could hear the faint crunch of gravel under their shoes as they approached, and my chest tightened instinctively. There was a tension in the air I hadn't felt in years, a silent warning that something bad was about to happen. The first words I heard carried that warning into reality. "You can't just plant these here," one of them said sharply, his tone dripping with authority. "It violates HOA rules. You need to remove them immediately." Emily looked up, her hands still covered in dirt. She smiled politely, the kind of smile that disarms people without even trying. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "but these flowers were approved. I checked with the office last week." The man's face tightened. "That's not how it works. Rules are rules. Compliance is mandatory. You will remove them or face consequences." It was a small thing in the grand scheme of life, I thought at first. Tulips. A couple of rules about landscaping. But there was something in the way he spoke, an arrogance, a sense of entitlement that made my skin crawl. Emily stood her ground, calm but firm, and that's when I noticed it. The second man leaning a little too close, the third one shifting impatiently from foot to foot, hands brushing her shoulder in a way that was meant to intimidate. I froze. Part of me wanted to yell, to storm out and stop whatever was about to happen. Another part of me, a part I've relied on my entire life, forced me to watch, to measure, to wait for the right moment. My training wasn't just for war zones. It was for moments like this, moments when a single misstep could escalate everything. Emily tried to reason with them. "Please," she said, her voice steady. "This isn't necessary." "We can talk about this calmly. There's no need to." The taller one cut her off, grabbing a handful of the tulips and yanking them from the soil. Dirt flew. She gasped, stepping back instinctively, and the third man reached out, trying to grab her arm to pull her further away. My heart stopped. I wasn't there yet. I didn't move. But my mind was calculating every angle, every possibility, every way I could protect her before things got worse. She was frozen, not from fear but from shock. And even in that moment, she didn't scream, didn't lash out. She just looked at them, eyes wide, as if silently asking why this was happening to her. It hit me then, like a punch to the chest. This wasn't about flowers. This wasn't about rules. This was about power, about control. About people who thought they could dominate everyone around them because they wore a badge and carried a clipboard, and they had no idea who they were dealing with. By the time I got to the edge of the driveway, the scene had already set itself like a storm on the horizon. Dirt and petals were scattered across the sidewalk, Emily's hands shook slightly, and the 3 enforcers stood over her, confident, smug, and completely unaware that their next mistake would be the one they'd regret most. I looked at her and she looked at me. No words passed between us. None were needed. That moment, the quiet before the storm, was everything. I knew what I had to do, and I knew deep down that once I stepped into that fight, there would be no turning back. By the time I reached the edge of the driveway, the 3 HOA enforcers hadn't noticed me yet. Their focus was entirely on Emily, and I could see the smugness in their eyes, the kind of arrogance only people who believe they are untouchable carry. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to stay calm. Years of training had taught me that control is more powerful than rage, even when every instinct screams to act. Emily finally stepped back, brushing dirt from her hands and knees. "Please," she said again, her voice quieter now, trembling slightly. "You don't have to do this." "There's no reason for this to get ugly," the taller one scoffed. "Rules are rules, ma'am. Compliance is not optional. You can either remove the flowers or we'll handle it for you." "Handle it," Emily repeated, glancing at me over her shoulder. That glance, it broke something open in me. I had never seen her look so small, so exposed. And I knew right then that whatever this was, it wasn't going to end peacefully. The third man moved closer, and I felt my stomach drop. He reached for her arm again, just slightly, but enough to push her off balance. Emily tried to pull away. "Stop! Don't touch me!" she said, her voice shaking but firm. That was it. I don't think they even realized how close they had come to unleashing a storm they couldn't control. I took a deep breath, my hands tightening at my sides, remembering every drill, every mission, every second where hesitation had cost someone everything. I stepped forward slowly, making sure they could see me, letting my presence fill the space between them and her. "Excuse me," I said, calm but commanding. My voice was low, steady, and it carried an authority that made even me sit up straighter as I spoke. "Step away from my wife." For a moment, nothing happened. The tall one raised an eyebrow, clearly sizing me up. "And who are you?" he asked, his tone dripping with challenge. I leaned in just slightly, letting the years of Navy SEAL training seep into every muscle, every posture, every word. "I'm the man she married." "And you just laid hands on her." "That was your first mistake." The taller one laughed nervously, a sound that cracked before it reached his throat. "We're just enforcing HOA rules," he said. "There's no need to—" "Rules don't give you the right to touch my wife," I interrupted, my eyes locked on his. "And you're about to find out the difference between enforcing rules and crossing a line you shouldn't have." Emily's eyes widened, but there was no fear there, just a silent plea to stay calm. She trusted me in a way that made me feel responsible for every ounce of danger that came her way. And right now I could see the fear in the other men's eyes slowly creeping in. For the first time, I felt the balance of power shifting. The second man shifted, clearly unsure, while the third one, he didn't move. He just stared, his hand half raised, and I could almost see the realization hit him that this wasn't going to be an easy intimidation. I stayed still, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension build. Then, as if on cue, the tall one stepped back, muttering something about, "This isn't worth it," under his breath. I didn't move, didn't relax. One wrong step, one careless word, and it could all explode into something much worse. Emily was still standing behind me, trembling slightly, and I placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Not to hold her back, but to remind her she wasn't alone. "They think they can scare us," I said softly, more to myself than anyone else. "They don't know who they're dealing with." And that's when I realized just how deep this went. This wasn't about flowers. This wasn't about fines or HOA rules. This was about control, about ego, about people who thrived on making others feel small. They had picked the wrong target the moment they decided to intimidate my wife. And I knew that if this escalated any further, it wasn't going to end with just a warning or a complaint. I also realized that I couldn't handle this like a normal homeowner. I couldn't just file a report and wait for them to understand the rules. They had crossed a line that demanded action, but I had to be smart. I had to control the situation, gather my evidence, and make sure that when I pushed back, it was decisive and lawful. I stepped fully into the driveway now, letting my presence fill the space, and the 3 men visibly tensed. Emily looked at me with a mix of relief and apprehension. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the tallest one. "I'm fine, but they're not going to touch you again." And just like that, the stage was set. The calm neighborhood morning had turned into something charged, something that hummed with tension. I knew these men weren't going to back down easily, and they certainly wouldn't admit defeat without a fight. What I didn't know yet was how far they were willing to go, and how much I would have to reveal about myself to make them understand that underestimating me and my wife was their gravest mistake. For the first time since we moved here, I felt the weight of the storm coming. And it wasn't just the HOA rules we were up against. It was something much darker, something personal. And it was about to test every ounce of control, patience, and training I had left in me. I could feel it in the air that evening, the kind of tension that makes your skin crawl and your chest tighten. The HOA enforcers hadn't backed down entirely, despite their nervous gestures and half-hearted mutters. They weren't gone. They were regrouping, plotting their next move, and I knew instinctively that this wasn't over. Emily and I stayed inside after that morning. I didn't want her to see how much my blood was boiling, how every memory of control and combat training was screaming at me to act. I had to be careful. I had to handle this like a calculated operation, not an outburst of anger. Still, I couldn't ignore the fear that flared in her eyes whenever she glanced out the window. It wasn't fear of me. It was fear of them, and that broke me in ways I hadn't felt in years. By mid-afternoon, I noticed something strange. A black SUV, nondescript but deliberately parked, lingered near the entrance to our street. I couldn't see who was inside, but the way it waited, slowly circling the cul-de-sac, made my stomach sink. They were watching. The enforcers were escalating, and I could feel it in my bones. Emily noticed it too. She was watering the backyard plants when she stiffened, squinting toward the SUV. Do you think that's them?" she asked, her voice small. I didn't answer right away. I just walked over, placing a hand on her shoulder again. "Maybe," I said carefully. "But if it is, we'll deal with it. Together." The first direct confrontation had rattled them, but it hadn't broken them. They were testing the waters, trying to intimidate us without crossing the line that would get them in real trouble. But I knew people like this. They rarely stop at intimidation. They escalate until someone pushes back, and I had a feeling we were about to reach that breaking point. That night, the tension grew worse. There was a knock at the door, sharp, deliberate. Emily froze, her hand halfway to the lock. I moved instinctively in front of her, peering through the peephole. It was the tallest of the HOA enforcers, his face illuminated by the porch light. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was predatory. "I need to speak to you," he said, raising his voice just enough to carry to anyone nearby. "About this morning, it's urgent." I stepped outside, keeping my voice calm but firm. "If it's about enforcing rules, we've already resolved that." His smile didn't falter. "You don't understand," he said. "We're talking about consequences. Serious consequences." My heart sank. This wasn't about flowers anymore. It wasn't about fines or rules. It was about intimidation, about control, and it was personal now. Before I could respond, he leaned slightly forward as if trying to intimidate me physically. My training kicked in, the years of drills and combat awareness sharpening every sense. I didn't move aggressively, I didn't need to, but the energy I projected was unmistakable. He hesitated, his eyes flicking to Emily behind me, and then back to me. "You shouldn't have involved yourself," he said finally. "This isn't your fight." I leaned in slightly, letting my voice drop low, steady, and sharp. "It became my fight the moment you touched her, and I suggest you remember that." For a heartbeat, he didn't speak. Then he turned abruptly, marching back toward the SUV. I could feel his anger, his frustration, and the storm he was brewing inside. But I also sensed something else, fear, a flicker of awareness that he might have underestimated me, and that made him cautious. After he left, Emily turned to me, her eyes wide. They're not going to stop, are they?" I shook my head slowly. "No, they're not." We spent the rest of the night on high alert. Every shadow outside, every car that passed too slowly made us tense. Emily stayed close, and I kept one hand near the door, another near the phone. Sleep was impossible. I kept thinking about what they had done, touching her, trying to scare her, testing her boundaries. And I thought about the lesson they were about to learn. There's a line you don't cross, and they had just stepped over it. But even as my anger burned, a part of me felt a strange satisfaction. This wasn't just about retaliation, it was about justice. And I knew that to truly protect her, I had to be smarter than they were. I had to anticipate their moves, stay calm, and strike at the right moment. Any misstep could escalate things beyond what either of us wanted. As I lay awake that night, listening to the quiet hum of the street outside, I realized something chilling. This was bigger than just us. Their behavior wasn't random, it was a pattern. And the more I thought about it, the more I understood that what had started as a small conflict over flowers was now a battle over power, ego, and control. By the time dawn crept over the rooftops, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, there would be no turning back. They had brought this storm to our doorstep, and the next move would decide whether they would walk away unscathed, or whether they would finally face the consequences of underestimating us. And deep down, I knew they had no idea who they were really dealing with. The next morning, I knew the confrontation couldn't wait any longer. That SUV circling the neighborhood, the lingering threat, the way Emily flinched every time someone walked past the house, it had all built up into a pressure I could no longer ignore. Whatever peace I thought we had moved into, whatever sense of safety I had imagined, it was gone. The HOA enforcers weren't just bullies anymore. They were predators testing the limits, and I wasn't about to let them cross any more lines. I stepped outside while Emily brought out coffee. I wanted her to feel some semblance of normal, even as my mind raced, calculating every angle, every possible move. The driveway was empty, the street quiet, but I could sense them somewhere close. And I had a sinking feeling that today, this was going to get personal. It started with a knock. Sharp, aggressive, almost demanding. Emily froze again, and I moved in front of her instinctively. The same three men were standing at the edge of the driveway, their posture rigid, faces tight with anger, and what looked like fear hidden behind arrogance. "You need to come with us," the tallest one barked. His voice clipped. "This isn't over. You think this is about flowers? It's about compliance, and you're making it personal." I took a step forward, letting every ounce of my presence fill the space between them and Emily. "You brought this on yourselves," I said, calm but lethal, "and now it's time to end it." Emily's hand gripped mine, trembling. "Please," she whispered, "don't let this get worse." I gave her a reassuring nod, but my mind was already racing. These men had misjudged us completely. They didn't know I had faced worse than this. Hadn't realized how wrong they were to think they could intimidate my wife without consequence. And then it happened. One of them, clearly the most reckless, lunged at Emily, trying to grab her arm again. It was instinct, pure reflex. In a single motion, I was in front of her, blocking him, my hand gripping his wrist before he could pull her. His eyes went wide as the realization hit. I wasn't just another homeowner. I wasn't someone they could push around. I didn't strike. I didn't have to. My presence, the control, the sheer intensity I radiated, it was enough. He froze, struggling against my grip, and the other two took a step back, uncertainty flashing across their faces. Emily stepped behind me, her hand brushing mine. "You're scaring them," she whispered, and I could feel the tiniest tremor in her voice, though she was holding herself together. "Good," I muttered under my breath. "They need to be scared." Then came the shock. The tallest man reached into his pocket, and I thought he might be pulling a phone, but instead it was a small, official-looking card. A notice. He shoved it toward me like he had some authority I hadn't seen coming. "Legal action," he spat. "We've filed complaints. You're being investigated for harassment." My chest tightened, not because I was worried, but because this changed everything. They weren't just bullies anymore. They were trying to weaponize the system against us. and I knew that if I didn't act carefully, this could spiral beyond a simple confrontation into something that would haunt Emily for years. I snatched the card, scanning it quickly. Procedural errors, baseless accusations, half-truths designed to intimidate, to make us back down. And I realized they had underestimated one critical factor. They didn't know I had spent years navigating situations like this, reading people, controlling outcomes without letting emotion get in the way. "You've escalated this far," I said evenly, locking eyes with the tallest one. "But don't forget who's standing in front of you. You think I'll let you touch her again? You think I'll let you manipulate the law to scare us? Wrong! Dead wrong!" For the first time, I saw the cracks in their composure. Fear was starting to replace arrogance, hesitation replacing certainty. But they were desperate now, and desperation is dangerous. I realized this confrontation wasn't going to be over with words or even warnings. They were going to push harder. And that meant I had to be ready for whatever came next. Emily squeezed my hand, and I felt a mix of gratitude and fury. She had stayed calm, but this was her life, her safety, and I couldn't let anyone touch that again. I looked at the three men, their confidence faltering. "Leave," I said, my voice low and steady, "and never come near her again." They hesitated, but I could see it. The fear in their eyes, the recognition that they had miscalculated. Then, almost reluctantly, they backed away, glancing over their shoulders as if trying to figure out if this was a bluff. It wasn't. As soon as they drove off, I turned to Emily. She exhaled shakily, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "I don't know what I would have done if you weren't here," she whispered. "You don't have to think about that," I said, pulling her close. "I've got you, always." But even as I held her, a new realization settled in, a cold, uncomfortable truth. This wasn't over. The stakes had just gotten higher, and the HOA enforcers weren't finished. What had started as petty intimidation had become a direct, personal attack. And the next move? The next move could change everything, for us and for them. I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they had no idea what they were about to unleash. It happened faster than I could fully process. That afternoon, Emily was in the kitchen when I noticed movement outside, too deliberate to be a coincidence. I grabbed my jacket and stepped onto the porch, heart pounding, senses screaming. The same SUV was parked halfway down the street, and this time, it wasn't just idling. The three HOA enforcers were out of the car, moving toward the house with an urgency that made every instinct in my body tighten. They weren't coming to talk. They were coming to intimidate, to escalate, and I knew it. My eyes scanned the distance, calculating angles, exits, potential threats. Emily appeared behind me, her hand on my shoulder. "Don't let them," she began, but I cut her off gently. "I won't. Just stay back." The tallest one stepped forward, his chest puffed out, trying to appear in control. But the other two lingered slightly behind him, and I could see the doubt in their eyes. The first confrontation had shaken them more than they wanted to admit. Still, their persistence was dangerous. People like this rarely retreat until they force their will. "Back off," I said, voice low, calm, but edged with steel. "This ends now. You touch her again, and there will be consequences beyond what you can imagine." He laughed, sharp and biting. "You think you can scare us? You think you're the law?" I didn't answer. Instead, I took a slow step forward, keeping my hands visible but my stance firm, steady. Emily's eyes followed mine, and I gave her the tiniest nod. Silent communication. She understood. This wasn't about confrontation anymore. This was survival for both of us. Then it happened. The middle one lunged, reaching for Emily again, and I reacted instantly. Years of training kicked in like muscle memory. I grabbed his wrist, twisted sharply, and shoved him back in a single motion. He stumbled, cursing, and the other two froze, the first one's eyes widening in shock. They hadn't expected resistance this fast, this precise, this controlled. "Enough," I said, every word deliberate enough to make them flinch. "You've crossed a line. You've violated every boundary. Walk away now or you will regret it." The tallest one advanced again, trying to act like the alpha, but I didn't flinch. I could see the beads of sweat forming on his forehead, the tension in his jaw. He was realizing finally that they had miscalculated, that I wasn't just some frustrated homeowner. Emily moved slightly behind me, but close enough that I felt her trembling hands brush mine. She was terrified, yes, but also steady in the only way that mattered. She trusted me, and that trust fueled me more than anger ever could. I took another step forward, and this time I spoke slowly, deliberately. You've made this personal. You've chosen to escalate. You wanted a fight. You've got one. And I promise you, it will not end the way you think. For the briefest moment, silence fell. The street was empty except for us and them. And then the realization hit them hard. Their smirks vanished. The arrogance was gone. They were confronted not by threats, but by certainty, control, and the unshakable presence of someone who had faced far worse and survived. They hesitated, backing toward their SUV, casting furtive glances over their shoulders. It was clear they had no plan for what was happening now. Their intimidation tactics had failed, and they were facing the consequences of underestimating us. Finally, the tallest one muttered, barely audible, "This isn't over," and retreated to the car. The others followed, glancing at us with a mix of fear and resentment, and drove away slowly, the engine's rumble fading down the street. I didn't move for a long moment. I just watched the taillights disappear, my chest heaving, adrenaline crashing through me in waves. Emily stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me, burying her face in my chest. "I was so scared," she whispered, shaking. "I know," I said softly, holding her tight. "But you're safe. I've got you, always." Even as we stood there, the intensity of what had just happened sank in. They had come after us, thinking they could intimidate us with authority, rules, and ego. But in the end, they had learned a hard lesson. Some lines you never cross. And some people you never underestimate. Later, we sat together in the living room, silence stretching between us, broken only by the occasional hum of traffic outside. Emily kept glancing toward the window, wary, still trembling from the confrontation. I could feel her fear, but also her relief. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just a victory, it was a turning point. The HOA enforcers wouldn't try that again, not after today. But the system they relied on, the rules, the compliance letters, the petty authority, they still existed. And I knew we had to be ready if they tried to use it again. That thought made my chest tighten. This was just the beginning of consequences, not the end. And as Emily rested her head on my shoulder, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. The true fight wasn't just about standing up to bullies. It was about protecting the people you love from the world, even when that world is small, suburban, and seemingly harmless. Because sometimes, even a quiet street can hide the most dangerous threats, and sometimes you have to be willing to face them head-on, no matter what it takes. The days that followed were quiet, almost surreal. The storm had passed, at least on the surface. The SUV didn't return, the enforcers didn't show up at our door, and for the first time in weeks, Emily could step outside without flinching. But I knew better than to believe the world had changed. What had changed was us. What had changed was the line we drew, and the certainty that nothing would ever threaten us the way it had before. I spent the next few days documenting everything, every interaction, every threat, every subtle attempt at intimidation. I filed formal complaints with the HOA management, included eyewitness statements from neighbors who had seen the confrontations or had experienced their own harassment. The enforcers' arrogance had left a paper trail that could no longer be ignored. I wasn't just protecting Emily anymore. I was making sure that no one else would have to face the same abuse. Emily and I rebuilt the small damage from the garden, the tulips, the careful rows of flowers, the dirt scattered across the sidewalk. But even as she planted each bloom, I could see the way she looked at me, not just with love, but with a quiet awe. She had seen me in ways most people never would. She had watched me control a dangerous situation, protect her, and remain calm under pressure. And I saw something in her, too. A fierceness, a resilience that went beyond fear. She had survived this, not because I had acted alone, but because she had trusted me, and because we had faced it together. The HOA enforcers eventually resigned quietly, one by one. Their bullying, their intimidation, and their blatant disregard for boundaries had been exposed. The management company installed a new board, composed of neighbors who actually cared about the community instead of power trips. And for the first time since we moved in, our street felt like home, peaceful, safe. But peace didn't erase the lessons learned. I realized something profound in those weeks of tension. Control and authority mean nothing if they're wielded without conscience. And courage isn't just about facing an enemy on a battlefield. It's about standing up when someone you love is threatened, even when the world thinks you're overreacting. Emily and I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. The air was warm, and for the first time in a long time, we didn't flinch at passing cars or strangers walking down the street. She rested her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her, holding her close. "I've never been more scared in my life," she said softly, her voice barely above the hum of the evening breeze. "You don't have to be," I replied, stroking her hair. "Not anymore." She pulled back slightly, looking at me with those wide, honest eyes. "I know, but you didn't just protect me. You made me feel strong too. Even when I was scared, I felt like I could survive this because you were with me." Her words struck me deeper than any adrenaline rush, any combat mission ever could. Protecting her wasn't just about strength or training, it was about trust, about the bond that made us unbreakable. And in that moment, I understood that the fight hadn't just changed the neighborhood. It had changed us. Over time, the memory of the confrontation softened, but it never faded completely. I carried it not as a burden, but as a reminder. Some threats appear small, even petty, like a few words or a shove. But unchecked, they grow. And sometimes the only way to protect what matters is to confront them fully, decisively, and without hesitation. I also learned that being underestimated can be a powerful advantage. The HOA enforcers assumed I was just another quiet neighbor, a retired man with a peaceful life. They didn't realize what I had faced, what I had endured, and what I was capable of. They underestimated the bond between a husband and wife, the lengths someone will go to protect the person they love, and the resolve of someone who refuses to back down. Sitting there with Emily, I thought about how fragile peace can be and how precious. The world doesn't owe us safety. Rules don't always guarantee fairness. People don't always act with decency. But what we do have is the power to stand up, to protect, to fight back in ways that matter. And in the quiet of that evening, I realized that the true victory wasn't just driving the bullies away. It was proving that courage, loyalty, and love are stronger than fear, intimidation, and arrogance. I looked at Emily one last time before the sun disappeared behind the horizon, her face soft in the warm glow of evening. "We made it," I whispered. She smiled, eyes glistening. "We did, and we'll be ready if anything comes again." I nodded. "Always." And in that moment, I understood that some battles change you. Some victories teach you more than any mission ever could. And some lines, once drawn, must never be crossed again. Because the right kind of courage isn't about fighting wars, it's about protecting what matters most, even when the whole world is blind to the danger. And standing there holding her hand, I knew we had done exactly that.